So, like I was saying, the difference, well, not the difference, let me focus here. Every cell in your body has 2 copies of each and every gene. You have 46 chromosomes, but each of them is a pair. On each one of these limbs, you have a copy of each gene. So if the gene for your hair color is here, over here the gene for your hair color can be also. If the gene for your eye color is here, over here, that can be also. Right? So you have 2 copies. You get 1 set from your mom, 1 set from your dad. So if your mom happens to have blonde hair, and your dad happens to have brown hair, you're going to have both of those genes. If your dad has blue hair, you have blue hair, because that's something parents have. If your dad has blue eyes, and your mom has brown eyes, that's going to be over here. You have 2 versions of each gene, and you may pass either of those versions to your children. So, let's take a look at this. If we were going to correct this, the code for physical traits is found on a molecule called DNA. Segments of this molecule that code for specific proteins are called genes. In order to conserve space and protect the molecule, DNA wraps around proteins to form structures called chromatin. When a cell is about to divide, these wrap up even tighter into chromosomes. Complex organisms have many molecules of DNA in every cell. Each molecule is commonly referred to as a chromosome, even if it is not wrapped up in it. Hey, I know what I'm talking about. So, we're talking about genes. You have 2 copies of each gene. How does that directly affect your traits? Well, in all organisms that have sex and reproduce that way, because there's different kinds, we'll talk about that later, you get at least 2 copies of each chromosome, and therefore 2 copies of each gene are present. The different versions of each gene are called alleles. Alleles means genes, it's just an individual copy. If an allele codes for a version of a trait that will mask the other version, the allele shown is called dominant. This happens all the time in people, right? A dominant allele, a gene that covers up another kind of gene, is, here's an example, brown hair. If you have one parent with blonde hair, one parent with brown hair, chances are you will have brown hair because brown hair is dominant. If you have one parent with brown eyes and one parent with blue eyes, chances are you will have brown eyes because the brown eye gene, the brown eye allele, is dominant to the other. In general, when we talk about this in science, we talk about this with uppercase letters. Dominant, uppercase letters. Nice, easy. An allele whose trait can be masked is called recessive. We talk about recessive with a lowercase letter. For example, consider the gene for earlobe shape in humans. Human earlobes, right? We have unattached earlobes here, which are dominant. And we have attached earlobes here, which are recessive. So if you have a single allele for the dominant gene, capital U, unattached earlobes, you will wind up with unattached earlobes. Take a minute and see if your earlobe is unattached. If it is, you have at least one dominant gene. If both chromosomes, well, the only way for you to have attached ears is for you to have 2 of the recessive gene. That is called homozygous. Remember we talked about homo meaning same earlier? You can be homozygous dominant. You can have free earlobes and have 2 capital U's. But you could also have a capital U and a lowercase u and have the unattached ears. That's called being heterozygous, when you have 2 different alleles for the same gene. The only way to have the recessive trait, however, is to be homozygous, have 2 lowercase u's. If you feel your ear and it's not attached, you will know that you are homozygous for that trait. These are examples of genotypes when I'm talking about the letters. Capital U, capital U, capital U, lowercase u, lowercase u, lowercase u, genotypes. If we get back to phenotypes, well, phenotypes are your free ear and your attached ear. Different kinds of traits, what you would call them. there's a teacher activity here, or a student activity here you can go through. It will talk about how these traits are passed if you really would like. Right? So, how is this expressed? We talked about this before. Your cells use the information in your genes to create proteins, or parts of proteins. That protein goes on to determine if a physical trait happens. Attached ears, eye color, muscle development, right? Even what kind of DNA even what kind of cell your DNA is in, right? It can turn into a muscle cell, bone cell, those things we saw when we cut open the frog. We talked about how most traits are controlled by multiple genes, but we're not going to get too far into that. And our messenger molecules are what take the DNA from the nucleus to the ribosome to make it happen. Remember, RNAs? We're just going to not get too deep into that. So, although genes do control inherited traits, they don't control everything. We don't have a lot of evidence to suggest that they control people's behaviors the way they are. There's a little bit, but we're going to say mostly not. Genetically, you may have the ability to jump very high, but whether or not you become a great volleyball player depends on if you play volleyball, if you're interested in it, if you practice a sport. Similarly, if you're good, the ability to play music, the ability to be an artist, or your intelligence may be inherited, but you have to do work if you want to become a musician, an artist, or a smart person. Most things are not simply given by your genes. Even physical features like height and body type can be affected by the environment. You eat a lot, you're going to get fat. Doesn't matter what your genes are. You may argue me with that. We'll talk about that. If you don't eat enough, you're not going to grow to your full height. So scientists are not entirely sure how many of our characteristics are determined by genes versus the environment. But what do you think? We'll talk a little bit more about this.